an art student who is researching a project into a failed Swedish fantasy film. The plot, if it had been made, would have been an utterly lavish film by Swedish standards. There was a script based on a hitherto unpublished short story by the latest Swedish literary star in the best genre after crime fiction, fantasy. We can, with or without a straight face, call him the Witch Master, like some newspapers did, at least before the most recent tragedies. There was a director with a few well-received but modest films to his name. For him, the project seemed to be the big test, potentially his portal to Hollywood, another world. We can call him anonymous, because he'll never make a name for himself. There was an actress being considered for the female lead, young and beautiful, who we can call the protagonist. There was an actor being considered for the male lead, young and beautiful, who we can call the antagonist. Naturally, there was an extremely competent producer, who I will keep even more anonymous than everyone else. There were promises of financial backing from the powers that be, in other words, state and capital. The latter word is that's a bit misleading, because there was namely one individual who had already sunk a few million into the project before it was shut down. In the press, he was usually referred to as the young IT genius and the like, but I want to call him the sorrowful prince, because that was how I, with varying degrees of irony and sarcasm, thought of him after we met. There was a bunch of others involved. I'd especially like to mention the one that, I just have to call the dwarf. Not for his stature, but because of his underground habits and gift for craftsmanship. On the internet forums he frequents, he picked a username that references the crafty dwarves of the Icelandic sagas. I can't go into it any more than that. I thought of the dwarf as my main character. He was the only one who hadn't put the wreck of a project behind him. For him, money was less of a concern. His conspiracy was the only one that, on closer consideration, was even greater. I mean, language. I think this is a story about language, but I'm not sure. I met the sorrowful prince by chance, in a bar. It doesn't matter which one. I was one of many potential princes he bought drinks for. It ended with me following him home. Not because he was a type I'm interested in, but because he was the type whose stories interested me. He lived in what I found to be a dreary but dear high-tech attic apartment, a short taxi ride away, where everything was connected to everything else, via cables, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, dust and spiderwebs. Shadows crept fuzzily in the corners. I assume he didn't see it as his job to clean, or to let anyone else in to do it. The electronics, on or on standby, gave off a pale blue glow that was the opposite of cosy. He had to take a computer off the unmade bed before we could have sex. I said, there's room for all three of us if you like. Our first coupling was not unpleasant for foreplay to our verbal intercourse. There's a tinge of a reality TV confessional about this project, I say as an aside. I've already gotten rid of the other recordings, but Anyway, finding the others involved, those who weren't melancholics and failed romantics, was a breath of fresh air. The Witchmaster turned out to be a banal creature, thankfully. I've met them before. Men who found success 10 or 15 years after they started going after it full time, and who now desperately try to squeeze as much out of it as possible. Those who, for example, start doing cocaine at an age when the rest of us have long since stopped. And not to mention the sex. But what the hell? Maybe he was within his rights, considering what little time he had left to live. His success was validated in spades. To be found, tied up, and drained of blood in your newly renovated bathroom can do wonders for a book's print run. Even one that was large to begin with. Well, as for his dignity, that was already lost. But who am I to... etc., etc. In any case, he happily let me interview him, and babbled on about himself, but didn't have much worthwhile to say about the story I was interested in. The story that was supposed to have been turned into the film was an extension of his fictional universe, he said. Dog. It was about a struggle for power between those with fairy blood and those with troll blood. The former being very beautiful, ice-cold psychopaths occupying leading roles in society, and the latter, nocturnal charmers and commodity speculators in the underworld. Terribly corny, at least broken down like this, but I didn't say that, of course. He didn't really know why the film wasn't made, but it wasn't particularly unusual, and did I know, by the way, just how well he was paid for the rights. He clumsily tried to seduce me later, but he didn't have a shot. Nevertheless, I read a couple of his books. As research, he foisted a few copies on me that he signed with embarrassing dedications. And even if that kind of writing isn't my thing, I have to admit they weren't bad. This genre, sture square fantasy that he came up with, was in itself a sure success. Alternate dimensions, stockbrokers without reflections, secret rooms behind the O-bar that you don't return from, not to this Stockholm, but to another Stockholm, darker and more dangerous, where feudal clans fight for power. Easy money meets Narnia, in short. But aside from that, there was something... I don't know what. So maybe I should have called him the Golden Goose instead of the Witchmaster. Because once you start laying golden eggs, it's only a matter of time until someone breaks your neck.